Hi, this is Dr. Thomas Armstrong, and I'm making a series of short videos to introduce my new book, The Power of Neurodiversity, Unleashing the Advantages of Your Neurodivergent Brain. This is a completely revised and updated second edition of a book that I originally did in 2010. The topic of this video is good job matches and mismatches for people with autism. One of the concepts that I integrate into my book is the idea of positive niche construction. This is something that animals do out in the wild. Birds build nests, spiders spin webs, bees create hives, and what they're doing is creating an optimal environment for themselves to allow them to do what they do most naturally, make honey, etc. So I have taken this concept from evolutionary biology and applied it to human culture. And I've identified 8 different components of positive niche construction. And you can go to my video. I did an earlier video on positive niche construction to get more detail about this. But the one component that I want to focus on here relates to careers. Essentially, I call it positive career aspirations. And this is very important, I think, for neurodivergent individuals early on to be thinking about their gifts and to be thinking about what's out there in the quote unquote real world that can make use of those gifts. So that, we have the tragedy of so many people with autism out of work who could work if they knew what their gifts were and if employees or employers were open and more tolerant about working with neurodivergent people. And that's beginning to change. And at least from this side, I think one thing we can do to help this is to look at careers, at different jobs, and see whether or not they match the gifts and strengths of a person with autism. So I'm going to first show some good matches, and then I'll show some bad matches. One of the strengths of people with autism, for many people with autism, is a gift for detail. What's called strong local analysis. Sometimes I call it being a where's Waldo person. They can just look in a mass of data and pick out small details. So for jobs like proofreading, this would be a good career match, or for being a paralegal, or for being a data analyst, for being a software tester, for example, someone who looks for mistakes in computer code. In fact, this is partly how the neurodiversity movement in the workplace got started with a company in Denmark called the Specialists. And what they found was that people on the spectrum seem to do a better job than anybody else in locating bugs in computer software. And that's what they did. They contracted out with Microsoft and other companies and to look over the software that they developed for bugs. And it turns out that 3/4 of the people who work for what's called specialister in Danish are on the spectrum. And they are there because they do a better job than anybody else. Their efficiency is 5 times that of competitive firms. And this work that they did in Denmark has eventually spread to many, many companies and outposts of the specialists around the world. So this is, a very interesting issue. Now we're seeing articles in the Wall Street Journal saying how being autistic can land you a job. And that's all very positive. And at the same time, we need to be specific in terms of what exactly are the strengths that fit into what specific careers. Another strength is enhanced perceptual functioning, being able to see patterns in things, being able to look at a series of numbers and see a pattern, to look at computer code and see patterns in that. So jobs like software engineer, data analyst, and so on would be good career matches for that ability. Then there's strong systemizers. I talked about systemizing in my video on the strengths of autism. And Simon Baron-Cohen at Cambridge University talks about people who are systemizers. They really can relate to machines more than to people, to systems like mathematical systems or computer programming language, better than social interactions. And so they're systemizers rather than the alternative in Baron-Cohen's model is empathizers. So they're strong systemizers and oftentimes not so good at empathizing. But at any rate, and there is problems with that, I realize. There's an issue called the double empathy issue or problem, which I'll take up in another video. But for example, working with a system like an electronic engineer or mechanical engineer, for example, working within these systems could be a very good job match for a person with autism who has that systemizing flair. Then there are the savant skills that are possessed by about 10% of all the individuals who have been diagnosed with autism. And this is having an intense ability in one area, even while other areas may be more difficult to operationalize. This is Stephen Wiltshire, at least the back of him. He's someone who has savant syndrome, and his particular area of expertise is drawing. Here he's drawing the landscape of Mexico City. He's done the landscape of London. And the thing is, he can do this after having seen, after having taken like a helicopter ride over it, the city for, 30 minutes or less. And he can draw the details amazingly. And he's an exceptional case of a savant, but I just wanted to mention that his gifts also translate into a money-making opportunity, and he does create art that he sells online. And so those people who have musical abilities, I'm thinking of Gloria Lenhoff with Williams syndrome, who has incredible musical abilities, and other savants can translate their gifts into actual work out there in the world. So for example, they could be artists with their artistic gift, musicians, sculptors. Alonzo Clemens comes to mind, someone who can take a piece of clay and turn it into an animal. I threw in gambler here. I took a chance here and threw it in. Remembering the movie Rain Man, when the Dustin Hoffman character had, this amazing savant calculating ability. And his brother took him to Las Vegas, and he used this ability to count cards using his calculating ability. So I don't know. They finally caught up with him. I guess the owners, they've got cameras all over the place, and somehow they determined that he was counting cards. But it's still worth a shot if you have that calculating ability and want to make some money out of it. At least one time around would be worth it, probably. The next gift relates to special interests. Hans Asperger, who was one of the two people who discovered autism in the 1940s, made this rather remarkable statement in 1944. He said, "We can see in the autistic person far more clearly than with any normal child a predestination for a particular profession from earliest youth." He's talking about their special interests. "A particular line of work often grows naturally out of his or her special abilities." So here he was 80 years ago telling us that, if you identify the special interests of someone with autism, maybe that can be the beginning of a career. And you look at somebody like Temple Grandin, who is probably the most famous autistic person in the world right now. And as a high school student, she loved horses. This was her special interest. And she also had a high school teacher who encouraged her to follow her interest in science. And so what she did was put those two things together and became one of the most successful, if not the most successful, animal engineer in the United States. She develops humane machinery for leading animals to slaughter in the beef industry. And whether, you might uh, turn up your eyebrows in relationship to this, but she's actually been given an award by the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals for her work. So, she's made an amazing career out of her special interests. And then finally, sensory sensitivities, which is a two-edged sword, essentially. It can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. I'm treating it here in its good element. Sensory sensitivities which allow the individual to feel soothed by sights, by sounds, by physical sensations, rather than disturbed by them. And one can parlay those sensory sensitivities into different kinds of jobs. So, for example, a lot of jobs out in nature, being a forest ranger, being a nature photographer, for example, where one's ability to um, focus on the sounds of birds, for example, and get great shots, or animals, to follow animal tracks, all these sensory um, things that are going on in nature would be an ideal fit for someone on the spectrum who has these kind of sensory sensitivities. So nature photographer, sound engineer, someone who goes into a, a building that's going to be turned into a concert hall and uh, looks at how it can be engineered or made through architecture to have the best quality sound. I even threw in perfume tester. There probably aren't a lot of jobs for perfume tester, but I'm sure at least there are a few. And for someone who has a tremendous sensory sensitivity to smell, that might be a way to translate that ability into dollars or euros, depending upon where you are. Now to talk about a few job matches that are not so good for people with autism. So I'm looking here now, instead of the strengths, I'm looking at the difficulties. And we have multi-tracking as being a hard thing for many people on the spectrum to do, keeping track of a lot of things that are going on at the same time. So I'm looking at a job that might cause stress. For example, a cashier at a store, especially a large store with a lot of people coming up to the cash register and having to keep track of the cash register, the computer, rather, the receipts, the socialization involved in keeping the customer satisfied and so forth. That's a lot to take care of, and that might not be the best job match for people with difficulties with multi-tracking. Some other jobs might include being a cashier, well, I just mentioned cashier, being a taxi cab dispatcher, being a telephone operator, and so forth. Another difficulty is jobs that include or involve a high level of socializing, which may not be the strong suit of many people on the spectrum. So a job like a car salesman, used car or new car salesman, probably would not be a good match for many people on the spectrum because there's the need there to schmooze with other people. A lot of uh, subverbal cues are used, when the customer comes in, being able to catch their eye, being able to convey some positive signs to elicit their cooperation as a potential buyer. And then, of course, their knowledge of cars and how they can, I want to put you in this car, the persuasion skills that have to be used. That also is probably not a strong suit of many people with autism. And I should mention here that even though I'm saying it's not a strong suit or not maybe a good match, there are individuals on the spectrum who would be very good at this because people are unique, people are individuals. And we don't want to stereotype a person with autism. We just want to make some suggestions about, where you might want to put your strengths, and your interests into finding a job. And so, car dealer or other jobs that involve sales may not be the best route. And other high socializing jobs might include being a waiter, being a receptionist at an office, and so on. Then another difficulty is sensory overload. That's the negative side of what I talked about earlier, the sensory sensibilities, which can be a positive, but can also here be a negative. And so you look at a career, for example, like construction, where you're working amidst all kinds of machinery and pounding and rocks falling and, high sensory overload might be a very stressful job for a person with sensory sensitivities. Another job that might not be a good mix is air traffic controller, also because of the multi-tracking involved, and a factory worker, again working with the machines, the sounds, the grime, if it's in, that kind of factory, and so forth. If you're interested in getting more information about this, I would like to recommend uh, a book by Temple Grandin and her co-author Kate Duffy called Developing Talents. It's subtitled Careers for Individuals with Autism. And she has some very good advice about good careers and bad matches for careers for people on the spectrum. So that's a little bit about careers. I do talk a great deal about careers in my book, not just for autism, but for ADHD, dyslexia, and other neurodivergencies. And so I hope you get the book. I hope you share it with your friends and family and teachers and therapists and employers or employees. If you want to get on my email list to receive my blog posts, which often have to do with neurodiversity, go to my website, institute4learning.com. That's institute4learning.com, and enter your email address, and you will receive my 200-item neurodiversity strengths checklist, which is an assessment that I created where a person will walk away knowing a lot more about what they're good at than what they're not good at. And so, again, go to my website, institute4learning.com, and the blog post sign-up sheet is right there on the home page, and it's also on my blog page. So thank you for listening in, for watching. I hope the information that I shared was useful to you, and I wish you all the best in your journey to celebrate the abilities of neurodivergent and neurotypical people everywhere. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.